Welcome everyone. I think maybe still people will come in as we start. Thank you for coming to this talk, which is yet another migration story, but I hope maybe you can relate or you can find some things that are interesting here. Before we get into the topic, I'm just going to briefly say 2 words about myself. So my name is Quentin. If you can't already tell, I'm from France. Maybe you will be able to say by the end of the session. But I've been living in Sweden for 3 or 4 years now. I'm currently working for a company called Rebtel as a data engineer and in the data team. So for those of you who don't know, Rebtel is a cross-border tech company that was created in 2006, so quite a long time, although not 200 years ago, but fairly decent for the digital age. And then we are basically a telecom/fintech company where we enable migrant workers that go live abroad to stay connected with their family and their loved one. So in this presentation, we'll go over where we started from and what our legacy stack used to look like, and maybe some of you will be able to see some of the pain points that we're having and that you're having as well, or used to have. And then we'll also see what we put in place or how we managed to get out of this. And then finally, we'll see where we are now and then where we are thinking of going. So our journey begins with a tech stack that you might be familiar with, which is Matillion and Snowflake. So Snowflake, I think, needs no introduction, but maybe in Matillion, not everyone is familiar with it. So it's a graphical user interface that enables you to drag and drop components into a canvas, and that is how it looks like. So on your canvas, you're going to have different set of transformation, right, that you can link together with different links, basically. So this is a very powerful tool if you use it correctly, where you have all your transformation that can be low or no code based. So it's very useful for people that are maybe not as technical as, or maybe not comfortable using Python or SQL transformation. Around this, of course, we had a lot of different tools. And just to get an overview, this is not exhaustive, but this is some of the tools that we used to have around it. So as you can see here, Matillion, we were using really to have the whole ingestion and transformation done into Snowflake. And we had a few different source systems. So we had external partners that were handling either our CRM or our payment data. And we also had our backend system. So this is our own app on the phone where we have obviously all the transactional information. And on top of this, over the years, obviously our data stack has changed a lot because we were created 17 years ago. And then among this time, there was a new tool that popped up and you're probably familiar with, which is dbt, right? So I think we started using dbt around 2019 probably. And that was very early days for dbt, of course. That was around 0.12 or something very early. And then we started using this because we were just more comfortable in the team writing SQL. We had data engineers, so for us, we felt comfortable writing code directly rather than just having graphical components that you drag on the canvas. But from here, I think you can already tell some of the pain points that we had. So maybe the most obvious one is that we had some redundant part of our pipeline. So having transformation set in 2 different places, that is, I think we can already say, not ideal, right? Because if something happens or if you're just adding new transformation, like you have to figure out where you're putting this new transformation. Is it going to be in Matillion or is it going to be in dbt? Some additional problems that we had, and something that I didn't really mention earlier, but Rebtel is a very small company. So over the years, we've had different shape and sizes, but up until 3 or 4 years ago, I think it was about 10 people in the company, right? So only one data engineer that was taking care of all of this. And currently, we are about 40 to 50 people with a bigger data team. But at the time when we started to set this up, this infrastructure overhead took a lot of our time from business delivery. And instead, we had to maintain everything because we were using dbt core. We had to host this on a Kubernetes cluster on Azure, and then we were orchestrating that with Airflow. I'm sure a lot of you are doing something very similar. Other points that were challenging for us, obviously multiple point of failure. That is a big problem for anyone that has experience in a large pipeline like this. So say we had some issues in Looker for some incorrect reporting, there would be a real hassle to try to figure out where the problem was coming from, right? Is it DBT core transformation? Is it material transformation, material ingestion? Is it actually coming from the source system? Like every time there was an error, it was very difficult to just retrace everything, and it would take a lot of time, like hours, days, or sometimes more. Some additional points that we had, so to get the data from our own backend database, we had some Python scripts that were running on SQL Server, and that was generating batches of data every 2 hours, and it's not fairly high latency, but it's obviously not ideal in this day and age where you want to have the data as soon as you can. And another key point was the expensive license for Matillion. Now, I think for us, like I mentioned, we were very comfortable using SQL. So most of the components that we had in Matillion were just SQL queries that are just being executed in Snowflake. So that meant that we were paying, I think it was about $100 per day for just the license, but then the compute of the transformation was still being done in Snowflake at the end of the day, right? So it didn't really make sense to have this expensive license that we didn't really use to the full capability. For us, it was just a way to orchestrate and to create the DAG of the transformation. Some additional pain points that we have here that was just due to our setup. We were not really able to reload the data without significant work. So again, if we had some issues in Looker, it would be very difficult to try to reload everything because we had batch data loads, and then those were identified by some IDs. It would take a large amount of time to try to figure out how to reload some data if we were missing this. And this led, of course, to some friction between the data team and the business stakeholder that we can illustrate with some Slack thread that I found from a year ago. Maybe it's a bit small, but I tried to have some red boxes to illustrate the main points here. So the first message in the red was after an incident that we had in production. We were saying, sorry, we know this data is going to be missing, but we won't we won't spend time try to reload everything. It's just not worth it. And then the second message here, that's from a stakeholder that is noting that these issues tend to happen every month and is becoming a real problem that you can't justify why we have those dips or those inconsistencies in the data. So that was becoming a real problem. And then on top of that, another friction point with business stakeholder is that because we were spending so much time trying to fix the pipeline, then obviously it was taking time away from the actual business delivery and bringing new data points for our business. Some additional issues that we had with this was we didn't have any code versioning for our Matillion setup, right? I think it's definitely something that we can do. It's just that we didn't have that. And also a big problem was that we had some objects that were only defined in Snowflake. So we had some views that were defined, that were used for the transformation that were not really anywhere in Matillion. So Matillion components were using those views, but were not persisted anywhere. So that is obviously a big problem. If you need to change the views or if somehow the view disappears, then you're screwed, right? It's like back to zero, which is obviously a big problem. And the final thing is that we had a real problem trying to maintain data quality. We didn't really have any place for documentation or for testing. So obviously that meant that we were usually the last one to know about the data problem. Like stakeholders would have to tell us, okay, this looks incorrect in Looker. And I mean, if you're in the data team, I think that's the worst feeling ever, that a stakeholder is telling you that your data is incorrect. I think that's really the worst place to be. Just to mention here that most of these issues were simply due to the fact that we didn't have prioritized all these issues because, like I said before, we were a tiny team. So all these issues just piled up over the years to the point where it became really insufferable to have all of this, and that's what prompted us for action and to change all of this. So just to recap everything here. So the way we started from is that we had expensive toolings that we didn't really use to the full capabilities. Trust in the data was going down because we didn't really have proper testing, and we had frequent issues in the pipeline. Time to delivery coincidentally was going up because we were just fighting issues in the pipeline all the time. And then the worst thing is stress data engineer. I think we can all agree that no one wants to go to work stressed, not knowing which part of the pipeline has blown up. Your data engineer should be cherished. They are valuable resources, and at the end of the day, they should be focusing on something that really matters to the business. And so for all of these points, the data product value was really going down at Rebtel, and the situation was not ideal. So then, so if you have been like us in this situation or a situation like that, what should you be, or what should your next action be? So I think for us, the key thing is that we continuously brought up those issues with upper management and just resurface all of these problems continuously, so that it would not be hidden in some obscure data issues, and then on the contrary, they would know what's happening. And then as we did this, we managed to take some time away from regular deliveries and just try to put some thinking into where we wanted to go, and then how we would solve all of these problems. From there, we went back to a drawing board, and then from our architecture and from where all our pain points, we clearly laid them out, we decided to break down some of the components that we are here, and obviously most notably the extract and load versus transformation. So the first point was, like I mentioned earlier, it really makes no sense to have your transformation in two different places, right? So because we were, again, more comfortable using SQL as a transformation tool or a language, we just decided to consolidate everything into DBT, right? That just makes sense. And we had documentation that was embedded in the product, same for data testing and a lot of other features. So it just made sense to consolidate everything into DBT. And then on top of that, we didn't really want to spend any more time into infrastructure work, right? So we did some POC about DBT Cloud, and then we were really happy with this, so that just removed the whole overhead of maintaining the cluster, stuff that we really didn't want to do. And so we decided to move over to DBT Cloud. The next step after that was to look into the ingestion process. And our idea here was, as much as we could, to remove Matillion for our process and just make things easier. First thing that we started to look into was the bi-hourly dump. We're not really satisfied with this delay in the data, so we wanted to change this. And what we did here was we talked to our wonderful backend engineering team, and then we asked them to generate some events for us, as what they did, writing in their database. They would send us some event stream. And then as we did this, we were able to remove the whole Matillion thingy dependency and push to AVS. And then instead, we had some events that were sent in real time to our Kinesis stream, and then with a Snowpipe ingestion, we sent that to Snowflake, and that obviously greatly reduced our latency in the data. And then finally were the external systems that we had here. And then for this, we had different solutions. So where we could, we would remove or we would just push the data into S3. So that's either done via Lambda functions, or yes, if some capabilities were allowed from the source system directly, we would have the external partners send the data directly into long-term storage. And some other arrow that we don't have here, but some other system, we would simply push them to Stitch and then automate everything. And so that was the final state that we had, and in this we were pretty happy and confident that that would remove, most, if not all, the pain points that we had. Now, to get into a more technical side of things, and specifically about the transformation and how we decided to consolidate everything into DBT Core. So if you will excuse me for the very raw diagram here, I'm just a humble data engineer, I'm no designer, but this is very functional, let's say. So just as an example here, where we had our Snowflake raw data layer, and then in this, after that, we were creating our fact and dimension into Matillion, and then this was then pushed to Looker, right? The first thing that we had to do here was that we created some shell models in DBT, where we just would do a select star from the facts and the dimension that we had, and then we would simply repoint everything from Looker into the DBT model. So that was completely seamless, right? Because we didn't change any structure or anything. That was just like a select everything. And then as we did this, or after we did this, we decided to freeze any transformation, any further transformation in Matillion. if you're planning to migrate your transformation from Matillion or from whatever tool to another tool, you can't, it's not going to be very realistic to migrate your code while some code is still being written in the old system, right? So here we said any further transformation, like any new business delivery, will have to happen based on the DBT data, and nothing will be done in Matillion. And then after we decided to freeze that, we just went to work and created or taken all the SQL transformation that was happening in Matillion, and we just created our stages and our intermediate facts, our intermediate layer into DBT, and then we pushed this like that. So that really enabled us to make the changes go seamless from the business side, right? Because we are kind of doing this under the hood. And then once all the transformation has been done, then we are just able to savor the connection between Matillion and DBT and Snowflake and Matillion as well. Some additional points in here that we have on the transformation that maybe you have thought about or maybe you will find interesting. Without getting into too much detail, I will cover some of the things that we noticed during the work. So the first step for us was to figure out how to map the work. And I think this is something that if you work with DBT now, or if you have been working with DBT for a while, that you really take for granted is to have the DAG, readily available. But obviously this is not obvious for everyone, or it's not always been obvious. So luckily, I was not the one to do this, but when you have to create the DAG manually, that can be a rather painful process. If you attended the keynote yesterday, I think Tristan showed the huge DAG that they had at DBT. So try to imagine creating that by yourself and going into all the models and building this yourself. So this is a tiny, or not like this is a part of our Miro representation of all the DAG that we had. And then just to give you an example, so I think the yellow or / orange box on the side here, those are models that were in Matillion, and the stuff that is in the middle, that is in white, those were views that were only in Snowflake, right? So then we had to go into Matillion, see where the ref basically is coming from. Okay, it's coming from Snowflake. Then we have to do a select get DDL, to get the view definition, and then try to map that all the way. So I think we can all agree that no one wants to do that, or at least I clearly don't. Next point was how to release in production. So I think here something that is very important is that you could think maybe if you're doing your migration, you're going to do everything under the hood and then push everything, right? But I would argue here that it's much better to create small bundles of your transformation just to make sure that you can validate smaller bundles and not be overwhelmed with whatever you have. For us, because our business has changed a lot over the years, the assumption that we had in transformation obviously has changed, right? So as you do the migration from point A to point B, you're going to require, I think, the help from your stakeholder to verify the data at the end of the day. Of course, when you're doing the migration, you should validate your output is somewhat matching the other side of the transformation. But I think over the years, it's, for us, at least what we have seen in the migration, is that it's very difficult to match exactly the outputs, right? And because, as data engineers, we are maybe not super aware of the business as much as stakeholder, it's very important that you can ask for your stakeholder for validation, once you have deployed to production your bundles, then you can ask, okay, is this graph in Looker that you have been using, do the numbers seem different now, or is it okay? And I think that's very important. A few times when we release some bundles, some people have said, okay, my number have changed, is that expected or not? And then we were able to work with them to figure it out. So just to finally mention on the bundles, the way we decided to create that was to create bundle based on some facts and some associated dimension. So just to go back on the orders example, so that would be the base of what we would release, and then around that we would have a few dimensions, related to the fact orders, and then we release that together. Another question I think that is very interesting, and this is a clickable link. Maybe I will try to put it on Slack somewhere. It's actually from Slack as well. But it's what to improve versus what you want to move as is. I think from the thread here, that was really interesting. The general consensus was that you should focus on matching the output, right? And even if you find some issues while you're doing the migration, you should just log everything and not work on everything as you do the migration, because otherwise your migration time will just increase exponentially, and then it will be very difficult to justify why you are spending so much time on that. While I agree with this, and we generally did this for the majority of the time, I think we also tried to take care of some low-hanging fruits that we found in the transformation layers. So stuff like obvious incorrect deduplication on some new values that didn't really belong there. Some small stuff that could really make a high impact on the stakeholder side. We tried to take care of them as we did the transformation. And final point here, that I think is also quite important, or was very important for us, is that we have been able to be quite stubborn with our stakeholder in terms of focusing on the migration and not really dealing with the pipeline error that was still happening at the time of the migration. So we decided to prioritize some very important tables, mostly accounting stuff, really, just to make sure that our books were looking correct. I think that's the most important thing. But for any other thing that were having issues in the pipeline, obviously we would try to fix it, but we would not try to spend a lot of time to reprocess everything and making sure that everything looks peachy. So instead, we're just the same way that we decided to log the issues that we had as we did the transformation migration. We will just log pipeline errors that were happening at the time and just try to take care of that as we move forward and after the migration. There are, of course, other points. If you have any question afterwards, you can find me and see if we have faced the problems and how we dealt with it. But just one other thing I want to mention here before I move on is that for us, because we didn't really change the warehouse, right? We stayed in Snowflake, that was not really under question. But if you are changing your database, you will also have to watch out for changes in the SQL dialect that you have, and that can be, obviously quite problematic. So it's just something to keep in mind. So in summary here, two things that are really important and that can go hand in hand is that you need to talk to your management and get management buy-in to solve all of these issues. And then as you do this, you also try to evaluate and formulate architecture that would solve all of these problems. And then once you get management buy-in, you can finally increase your team size, at least that's what we did, to be able to focus efficiently on the migration. So we basically went from 1 data engineers to 2. And then one will be able to focus on business delivery, just making sure that we will not be stale on new requirements and so on, while the other will be able to focus on the migration fully. And that just meant that we didn't have one resource that was split 50-50 and having to switch contests all the time. And we really were able to focus on that, and that really made a big impact and really made the transformation go that much quicker. Something that is really important, and I will talk about after as well, is that you also need to give update and reminder on the work. Because migration like this can be very seamless for the business if you do your job correctly. You have to remind them why you're spending and investing so much time into doing something that is apparently not doing anything for the business. And for us, we basically just reminded our business about the points and the benefits of doing this. So that went like, okay, when we finalize this, we are going to be able to fix missing data going forward, right? DPT being idempotent, we will be able to reload everything, no problem. That also meant spending less time, less development time in fixing incident and firefighting, which also coincidentally meant more time being able to dedicate on business or adding business value and new deliveries. And then finally, it's like considerable cost saving that we had by removing some licenses. Cool. And where we are now, so just a few metrics that we had here. I think one of the very good one that we had was the cost reduction. I think we estimated that we had about 80% cost reduction with the changes now, which is very good for us. 0 to 100 tests are running now. Maybe that is not very impressive if you have thousands of models and how many I don't know how many tests you may have. But when you're starting from 0, I mean this is better than nothing, right? So we're pretty happy with where we are here. And then obviously as we continue working, we are adding continuously new tests. And something also very important for us, because we're a tiny team, we basically have 0 time spent in infrastructure work now, which is very good because we can focus on the things that really matter for us. And then also the final thing is that we have near real-time data points. And actually, the final thing is probably the most important one, that we have happy data engineers now, right? So we're not really stressed going to work anymore. We're just happy, and then we know that we can focus on the right thing for the business and make a truly great impact for our stakeholders. Just to finalize, a few key learnings that we had here. So I mentioned earlier that we had some upstream dependencies. I would argue that you need to take care of them as early as you can, because you don't want to be at the end of your project and be, idle waiting for other people to help you finalize the work, right? So, as early as possible, you should try to talk about these things with your external dependencies. It's also very important, I think, to include buffers in your timeline. So that goes into, trying to take care of some low-hanging fruits that you may have in your migration. And also for us, because we had transformation that were done years ago, you don't really know what you're going to find. So you can have unknown unknowns, weird things that are happening in the transformation, right? So it's very important that you plan some time just to make sure that you can care for these. And the final thing, again, I cannot stress this enough, is to remind your stakeholder about the different benefits of why you are doing this. And just briefly about where we want to go next. So now that we have mostly removed all the dependencies and all the historical things that we had, we're really looking forward to setting up some of these points that you have here, some things that maybe you already have, but we don't. So we're very keen to implement some CI/CD pipeline, right, to automate delivery and testing and so on. Very keen also to create some data catalog and just improve literacy in the company, make things easier to find, or make it easier to find our data and what lives where. And we're also super excited to find out some way to leverage machine learning. Now we can dedicate some time on that, because we're not just focusing on just fixing everything. Yeah, and on this note, I would like to thank you all for attending this session. I think we may have time for a few questions, but otherwise here are the links to find me, or you can find me in the event. Obviously, I will be here for the rest of the week. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
How long did it end up taking to do the full migration off of Matillion?
That's a great question. Maybe online. So the question is how long it took to do the migration. So actually, it's something I wrote in my note, but I forgot to say. So I think you really have to be patient for the whole process. So the way, I think just the conversation to get management buy-in, it went from January until October, just to say, this is the problem that we have, how we're going to fix it, and then get the buy-in to do this. So that was already, 3/4 of a year. And then for the migration of the transformation, I think that took, again, from the next January to June or July. So about half a year as well. And we're still a small company, so it's not like we have thousands of models. I think currently we have about 200, maybe 50 models in DBT. So it's still not huge, but yeah, decently significant. Yep.
For your data engineers, what was the learning curve going from Matillion to DBT?
From Matillion, okay. So I think most of our team actually was fairly new at the time where we decided to do the migration, right? So none of the people that implemented Matillion were there to migrate it away. But over the years, the data engineers that have come and gone in the team were always more comfortable with SQL, right? So at the end of the day, because all the components in Matillion were SQL-based, the learning curve was not really huge. We were, it's just SQL. So the learning curve is the same as everyone moving to DBT, I have to understand Jinja and see how the different tools work, how to manage the documentation and the testing and so on. So yeah, at the end of the day, I think it was pretty seamless to do this transition. Yeah.
And do you generally in terms of just enabling your data engineers, from a skill set perspective, is there something that you kind of set up during this course of this migration so that they were kind of making sure that they were up to date with certain things that needed to be done?
Right. I think, so again, we're a very small team, right? So it's not like we have tens of data engineers. So we didn't really have to go through like intensive training or anything. So it was more like keeping track of what was happening. And, we have some daily stand-ups, every day. So, I was the one actually doing the migration, right? So every day I would go in and say, okay, this is what I'm working on. Like, this is this cool thing that we can do in DBT that we couldn't before. So it's just like keeping each other informed and keeping each other in the loop. And, communication is key.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm very interested in the validation side. So when you said those small bundles being a fact table dimension relationship, how did you expose those? Did you expose them in a BI tool or just as a query in Snowflake?
To validate, you mean?
Yeah.
So from the stakeholder side, yes, it was in the BI tool, right? Because we're already having a lot of reports in Looker. So it was just making sure that those reports were still showing kind of the same number and nothing was usually off. For the engineer side, there are tools out there. The way we did it was very manual, just like take the MD5 hash of all the columns and hope for the best, essentially. But now you can also use tools like Datafold and DataDiff. I think that would make it so much easier. So we had those two parts of validation.
You basically validated on the metric and
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
for the stakeholders. And then did they own that validation or?
It was kind of like a joint process, really. Like we had the first go at it, and then when we were fairly confident, the metrics were usually different, not significantly different, but there were some differences here and there. So it was just a matter of we've noticed this as we did the transformation, and then from the stakeholder, is that a reasonable change, or is there something really going off? Yeah. So it was joint effort.
So you were running the two pipelines in parallel.
Actually, no. So like in the nice diagram I showed earlier, so we just when we finalized the transformation on the side, then we just cut Matillion and then move everything at once. But we did not remove the Matillion table straight away. So if something was really wrong, we would be able to revert back, the shell models, And if we had something really off, then we would be able to work on the site again. So that was our head of data that was bringing this. I think we had regular meeting like every week or every 2 weeks. And then every time, we would say like, this is the problem, just being stubborn and keep repeating the same thing. Also something that is really helping is that if you have breakage in your pipeline, then you can say, well, again, we have a breakage, we should do something about it, right? And eventually your stakeholder, they still want clean data and no errors everywhere. So they will understand that this is a problem and that we need to do something about it.
Do your data engineers report to the head of data?
They do, we do. It's a tiny team. It's 4 people in the data team. So it's 2 data engineer, 1 data analyst, and our head of data. So fairly small.
Matillion does ingestions, APIs pretty well, and orchestration across a number of different components.
Yep.
So to replace it with some, you mentioned Lambda and other, different number of tools.
Yep.
Did you lose the visibility of what's happening, or rather than having one tool, or what was the logic there?
I mean, we did not have any visibility in Matillion anyway, due to our setup, so we didn't really lose something that we didn't have. But you're right in saying that it could be a problem because now we have our ingestion on different tools, right? But then I think those two are pretty intuitive, or we're comfortable with it. Stitch is obviously made for this, so it's like Fivetran, for those of you who don't know. So it's made for monitoring, and then Lambdas we also monitor, or we have some tests in the raw data just to make sure that everything is there. But fair question.
Orchestration, do you use Airflow now?
We don't. We have DBT Cloud for the orchestration, but we don't really connect, when the data gets into the raw layer, that does not trigger events to DBT run at the moment. Yeah, we don't really have a lot of automation, which is why it's something that we look forward to do now that we have consolidated our pipeline. Yep. Cool. I guess we're done with questions then. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.